Okay, I guess we'll begin now. Good morning, everyone. I am Jeff Peckrell. I am co-chair of the Human Rights Working Group, and I'd like to welcome you to the last forum that we'll be having until September. We traditionally go on hiatus during the summer because a lot of people do take vacations during the summer, and we do too. So we're going to take a little pause from the programming, but we'll be back with a lot of interesting programming, hopefully this fall. I'd like to take this opportunity to announce a little bit that Bruce Newberger, who has been responsible for so much of the wonderful programming, finding the speakers, thinking of the topics, arranging for the people to be here, has decided to invest his time in something a little bit different. And he's been doing this for 7 years, so we certainly can't blame him for wanting a little change of scenery. So Bruce will be stepping back. And in the interim, at least, I'm going to be the leader of Forum, although we're discussing some, different ideas around how to run the program, and it might be a little different than that. But for now, at least, I'm the forum leader, interim forum leader. So if you have ideas during the summer for topics or other ideas for forum, feel free to reach out to me. Or of course, you can also reach out to Bruce, even though he's stepping back, he'll pass it on, or Dolores, or to Melvin Starks. So the three of us are the co-chairs of the Human Rights Working Group. Before I introduce our speakers for today from Neja, the National Equal Justice Association, just a few more housekeeping things. We'll do our Ohlone recognition. I'd like to also mention that we'll be doing Q&A at the end, as we always do. So Robin Larson here will be taking your questions. If you could write them down on the little cards on the chairs, and pass them to Robin, and we'll be doing the questions mostly at the end. But now I'd like to introduce Willard, who will do our Ohlone recognition. Please, Willard.
Good morning. I have an opportunity to talk about the acknowledgement that we are on, Ohlone Ramaytush unceded land. And that for this topic today, which is about protecting Mother Earth and the environment, is really appropriate because the first people of this area were stewards of the land. They had wisdom, knowledge for thousands of years, and they are caretakers. And I also want to acknowledge that, given that we still have quite a few very active, very talented, capable Native people in the San Francisco Bay Area. So it's not just the past, but we want to acknowledge that the ancestor, of the Native people are still very active in the San Francisco Bay Area. As I mentioned last week, please connect with various organizations such as the American Indian Cultural District in San Francisco. So now I want to turn it over to Bruce, and he will also have further words to discuss.
Thank you, Willard. We've been doing this, as other organizations have, for several years, of recognizing the original people in this part of the world. I think it's very important that we do that, but it's also important, I think, that it doesn't become a routine, and that we really think about the implications of what that means. That there was a civilization, thriving culture, and with many languages and a great deal of knowledge of the land and nature in general, who lived here for at least 10,000 years, perhaps a lot more than that. And think about the tremendous loss, not just to the Native people themselves for what happened with the genocide, but the loss to humanity of the knowledge accumulated in all those years. And if you multiply that by many times, you get a sense of what colonialism and capitalism and imperialism has wrought on the entire planet. It's been ravaged, and some of the cultures, old cultures, were destroyed, not, for the sake of accumulating wealth. And then on top of that, top of that insult and that injury, they were deemed to be inferior peoples, and racism, the racism that still burdens us here and burdens the entire world, really got its start in that era. And we're not going to really get out of this until we are able to transform our societies and transform our social systems, because we're still embedded in that same system that saw massacring people around the world as a good thing to do for civilization. And they had many people that would write about this. In fact, our academia were full of people who wrote about and praised that era. And we're just getting out of it, really. We have not gotten that far out of it. The mentality that brought into existence still is very much alive in this world, in this country. So anyway, with that, I just thought it's important that we think about these kinds of things. I want to introduce our guest speakers. I'm glad that they're here today to talk to us. Neja, or National Equal Justice Association, has been around since 1981. It's an all-volunteer, nonprofit, grassroots, community-based organization of low-income workers and others fighting for social, environmental, and equal justice. And I'm going to let them, flesh out what they've been doing and so on. I just wanted to read one thing from that I saw on their website, which I thought was very good and helpful. It says, with increasingly intense environmental disasters raging across our nation and planet on a daily basis, only the most callous and uninformed can help, but realize it is not only the most vulnerable groupings who are not recovering from devastating effects of man-made climate change, atmospheric rivers and flooding, drought, tornadoes and tornado fires, polar vortexes, sea level rise, and more, but entire towns and regions. No person, community, or nation is immune from the escalating planetary loss of natural ecosystems upon which humankind and all animal species rely for survival. So that's part of Neja's outlook. The two people who are going to be speaking who came this morning, Gail Williamson is Neja's director, has been a full-time organizer since 1983. She has worked with numerous community-based organizations of low-income workers on educational and training capacity over the course of her years as a volunteer organizer. Gail is the secretary-treasurer of the National Equal Justice Association and editor of the newsletter. And there should be copies of that newsletter on your seats, so you can get a chance to look at that. Neja is an all-volunteer organization, nonprofit, founded by clergy, attorneys, and other civil and community activists, which provides publicity, sponsorship, and support for independent all-volunteer organizations fighting for equal justice and social and environmental justice in their communities. And she's accompanied by Ailin Liang. She's the speaking engagement coordinator, is responsible for meeting with representatives and leaders of organizations and organizing presentations and speaking engagements to incorporate their constituencies and Neja's sustainable recovery campaign. So at that, I want to welcome them to come up and speak.
I took it down yesterday. I think you tried to clean it.
Wait, Jesse.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and all of you for inviting us here today. I think let's switch. Yeah, I'm Gail Williamson. I'm actually director of Neja. I don't know how I did that, but I must have gone back about 4 years, but it's okay. Thank you so much. We were founded, yes, by clergy, attorney. Our goal is to aid locally based efforts fighting to end patterns of injustice, particularly those encountered by poorly paid workforces of the nation. Our 41 years of experience working with grassroots community-based organizations of farm workers and service workers and other low-paid workers in their struggle for nutritious food, clean and affordable water, healthy and safe living and working conditions, and other survival necessities has shown us that poor and minority communities are hit hardest by environmental degradation. Neja accepts no government or strings attached funding. No one is paid a salary. Not yet. More recently, yes. I wanted to go through some of our work here in San Francisco, supporting efforts in the Bayview-Hunters Point neighborhood of San Francisco, fighting to force the U.S. Navy to remediate an environmental disaster that has exposed residents to decades of unimaginable levels of carcinogens. The health consequences are compounding the poverty that has beset that community ever since production jobs began leaving the area in the late 1970s, and the shipyard closed in 1994. The former naval shipyard is polluted with asbestos, PCBs, and radioactive materials. And even though it was designated a Superfund cleanup site by the EPA in 1989, little has been done to protect nearby residents. We are supporting groups in working to resolve the evictions, wage theft, credit and debt issues consuming the low-income working families in the area, hopefully to free them up enough so they can participate in the fight for accountability on the part of the government responsible for resolving the issue. Next slide, please. The Bayview-Hunters Point community held a rally, maybe some of you heard about it, in June 2022, when the San Francisco Civil Grand Jury confirmed what residents have been saying for years, that the city is not preparing for the predicted sea level rise, which will expose legacy toxic contamination, and spread it further into neighborhoods near the Superfund site, which is yet to be cleaned up. Neja participated in neighborhood and is participating in neighborhood door-to-door canvassing in the Bayview-Hunters Point neighborhood, talking to residents impacted by the toxic conditions. Neja further conducted poster canvasses to businesses, attended rallies, and took advantage of other speaking opportunities to support the community's struggle. We are still doing that. Neja volunteers organize bi-weekly informational tables accompanied by poster canvases and a weekly equal justice series presentations to inform residents and organizational representatives about our campaign, including the realities of the Bayview-Hunters Point struggle throughout this period. I'll note that on some of these community canvases, residents have not even known there was a Superfund site. It's pretty incredible that people who are suffering from asthmas and respiratory diseases, that we as community canvassers were saying, well, do you know there's a Superfund site here? These are people that have either lived there 2 or 3 or 6 or 7 years and don't know why they and their family are sick. This battle is an example of what communities are facing across our nation. As we experience or know friends and family impacted by drought, water shortages, wildfires, extreme heat, or severe flooding, these and other climate extremes are also raging across the country and literally around the globe. On June 8, 2023, 90 million people across the US and Canada woke up to hazy skies and air quality alerts for a third straight day as smoke from the Canadian wildfires reached places as far west as Kansas and as far south as the Carolinas. The sky turned orange in New York City, drastically increasing pollution there. This is much like it did here several years ago in 2020. You may remember the orange skies. That's when we printed this leaflet to publicize that, and just it was apocalyptical. Due to the wildfires and smoke from then, in addition to respiratory illnesses, they cause various cancers, premature birth, low birth weight, affecting the economic productivity and cognition of people around the world. Every year, 350,000 Americans die from air pollution, equivalent to the number of Americans who passed away from COVID in the first year of the pandemic. According to the EPA, 1,300 people die from heat every year in the US. I'm not sure how they're measuring that. I would like to also note that due to the contamination in the Bayview, we have the highest breast cancer rates of any city in the nation. The latest Pew Research Center study that was from Earth Day in 2022 that we could find said that 75% of Americans believe that our burning of fossil fuels is contributing to climate change. I'm sure all of you agree with that, or I sure hope so. A study in 2021 revealed that 2/3 of the people in the United States want the government to do more to address climate change. As a result of increasing global warming and climate change, we are seeing more vector-borne illnesses. 1,123,613 people died from COVID as of March 2023 in the United States. More people in the US died from COVID-19 than any other country in the world. Many domestic and international research institutes have stated that the US has underestimated the number of COVID-19 deaths. We know from our support of urban and rural, poor and community-based organizations who are on the front lines providing food, medical care, PPE, that the rates of death were 3 times higher in poor and minority communities than wealthier neighborhoods. On the other hand, the COVID-19 lockdown brought blue skies. As countries around the world ordered lockdowns, many fewer combustible engine vehicles were on the road. Some cities very soon saw blue skies for the first time in many years versus a smoggy haze caused by fossil fuel pollution. Emissions of greenhouse gases dropped 4.6% in 2020 due to the stay-at-home orders. After analyzing the emissions data for 6 economic regions across 69 countries, a total of 17% reduction in daily carbon dioxide emissions was observed by April 2020 in contrast with the mean level in 2019. That's a lot in just a very short time. Imagine what we could do. Then, as the vaccines rolled out in the wealthier nations and throughout the world, businesses began to reopen and some workers returned to work, and the air pollution returned. Our emissions have increased 6.4% since the world started to move again. The world continues to suffer relentless and even more extreme climate events, many of which scientists have openly and directly linked to the burning of fossil fuels. What is standing in the way of the U.S. developing and implementing a comprehensive plan to fight the climate crisis in our country and world while also eradicating poverty? In the U.S., 13,690 people died of starvation last year. And with the recent debt ceiling agreement, we have seen further cuts to food stamps, Medicaid, and the rollback of student debt cancellation. In the new debt ceiling agreement, the federal government approved the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which could potentially emit as much greenhouse gas emissions as 26 to 37 coal-fired power plants. That's a natural gas pipeline, in case you don't know, that releases methane. All natural gas, all fracking releases methane, which is 86 times worse for the air for the first 20 years of release. In 2020, the COVID pandemic eclipsed the horrors of global warming, but this pandemic also has a relationship to the actions that cause climate change. Greta Thunberg explained this succinctly to the World Health Organization in 2021. Quote, 75% of all emerging disease comes from animals, and as we are cutting down forests and destroying habitats, we are creating ideal conditions for diseases to spill over from one animal to another and then to us. We can no longer separate the health crisis from the ecological crisis, from the climate crisis. It is all interlinked in many ways. In today's world, these man-made disasters resulting in the climate crisis have created increased unemployment, poverty, hunger, and homelessness. Not only have climate refugees reached 25 million people worldwide, but the number of climate refugees is expected to double within the next 5 years. Then add this to the threat of pandemics such as COVID-19. These pandemics will become more and more difficult to eradicate because of the instability and poverty of the Earth's populations, including here in the US, and the overburdened and unprepared health systems worldwide. Human activities are responsible for around 90% of the increase in atmospheric CO2 concentration since the pre-industrial era. Extreme heat waves, heavy precipitation, and droughts are becoming more frequent and intense in many regions of the world. And these trends are projected to continue. The World Meteorological Report says we have until only 2027, earlier than the 2030 projection, before the planet reaches the tipping point of 1.5 degrees Celsius. The March 2023 International Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, report issued in March 2023 concluded that unless the world reduces emissions, captures carbon, we are, as General Secretary Antonio Guterres said, on the highway to hell with our foot on the accelerator. Neja's foundational goals and principles are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and so are our fights for poor and minority communities. The 17 goals, or SDGs as they're known, Sustainable Development Goals, are comprehensive, interconnected, and globally applicable. They were passed in 2015 by 193 nations across the member nations of the United Nations, the U.S. included. The United States has not only not implemented the SDGs, but has not created and empowered governmental bodies to be responsible for defining and implementing a national plan. Yet the goals include ending poverty, ending hunger, good health and well-being, justice for all, climate action, sustainable infrastructure. It's clearly what we need in our nation. There's been basically a mainstream media blackout about the SDGs. Meanwhile, the cornerstone of U.S. energy strategy since 2005 is hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. Fracking, I'm sure you're aware, but just in case, is the oil and gas drilling method that breaks up shale rock. Today, fracking produces 79% of U.S. natural gas and 65% of U.S. crude oil. The U.S. is the world's biggest exporter of liquefied natural gas, LNG, which uses frack gas and generates the equivalent of 400 metric tons of carbon each year. Over 17.6 million U.S. residents live within 1 mile of at least one active oil or gas well, which detrimentally impacts public health, climate stability, water and air quality, farming, property values, economic vitality, and the quality of life. Those living near fracking sites are at increased risk of contracting cancer and a host of other medical disorders, with pregnant women and children at greater risk. North American fracking operations for both oil and gas are driving the current surge in global levels of methane. As I mentioned, a greenhouse gas 86 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period, and which has contributed 40% of all global warming to date. America's billionaires alone could literally solve the problems of hunger and lack of vaccines globally and the climate crisis just by using their own money. Instead of one after another is taking off into near outer space for personal joyrides and as a way to advertise future high-cost space tourism options for the ultra-wealthy. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of their low-paid, overworked, and unprotected workers and customers foot the bill. According to Forbes, a new billionaire was minted every 17 hours on average during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Altogether, the world's wealthiest are $5 trillion richer as of 2021. Now, that was a lot of bad news, right? We are conveying here that there are more solutions, be of good cheer, than there are problems, especially when it comes to the climate crisis. The primary obstacle lies in the lack of commitment and prioritization to do what is needed to change the trajectory of global warming. There are two major courses of action for reversing the climate crisis. One is to stop the destruction that is occurring now. Makes sense, right? Stop the generation of greenhouse gases by taking polluting technology offline and using technology that does not pollute. Sounds simple, right? Stop the destruction of the environment and the poisoning of the air, land, and water. Second is to implement the tactics and technology that clean the air and the water and restores the land by removing the dangerous toxins and gases. The dichotomy of these problems and solutions are interconnected. It is going to take a two-pronged approach. One is to build organization to contact those individuals and groups who see that we are running out of time. We already saw that the majority of Americans think we should do more about stopping global warming and man-made climate change. The time now is to seriously address that, and through this, build the demand for the creation of living wage jobs to build and install the infrastructure and technology needed to effectively fight this crisis. The second is to organize and demand our local, county, regional, and state government leaders install the SDGs. One sec. The Bayview-Hunter's Point Superfund site has been there since World War II. There has been no cleanup for as long and longer than I've been alive. So if we followed the premise of the SDGs, we would clean things up, but we haven't. There's a stymie at the local government level, and it's affecting all of us. No man, okay, thanks. No man or organization is an island. While many organizations are doing the work of the SDGs, environmental organizations, faith-based groups, student groups, you've had some of them speak at forums here, justice groups, social and environmental justice, health groups, businesses are working to put in sustainable goals. But frankly, we're still finding many people don't even know about them. And while poor and minority communities are hit hardest by environmental degradation, we see that they have historically not had the opportunity to be leadership in the environmental movement. That's where Neja comes in. We think we need to move together as a nation to build 10,000 voices to build a forest and that political will to demand sustainable development consistent with the SDGs here in the United States. Neja is promoting environmental, social, health, and economic solutions and successes consistent with the SDGs, the 17 goals, as well as the October 13, 2021 Kunming Declaration of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity. That happened the same time as the Glasgow Conference, by the way, and refers to the SDGs. And the 2050 vision for biodiversity, realizing that healthy ecosystems are intertwined with sustainable recovery and development. Neja's Sustainable Recovery and Development Campaign focuses on public speaking, telephone outreach, informational tables, house meetings, conferences, and other forms of person-to-person organizing to battle the different disinformation and the lack of solutions in the country. Sustainable solutions abound. We're going to go through some of them. All of you may have more. Some of you may know some of these, but we think we have a few surprises. For example, quality reforestation replacing trees that have died or have been cut down, combined with quantity that is planting more new trees in areas that didn't have them before. Afforestation is one of the most successful ways to mitigate greenhouse gases. Afforestation is the establishment of a forest or a stand of trees in an area where there was no previous tree cover. Many government and non-government organizations directly engage in afforestation programs to create forests and increase carbon capture right now. Afforestation is an increasingly sought-after method to fight climate concerns as it is known to improve soil quality and organic carbon levels into the soil to avoid desertification. Neja has supported the Arbor Day Foundation, which distribute nearly 500 million trees to plant in their neighborhoods, forests, and throughout communities. Something as simple as planting the correct type and sufficient number of trees can capture carbon dioxide from the air. According to the EPA, forests and other wildlands now absorb 13% of US carbon dioxide emissions. It's obviously a science. We refer to the indigenous people that were here before us. They have that science, they utilize that science. Restoring lost coastal vegetation and expanding coastal habitats can sequester a very high amounts of carbon and protect coastlines from erosion in the face of rising sea levels. Grasslands, peatlands, coastal vegetation such as mangroves, seagrasses, and plants existing in tidal marshes are carbon-rich ecosystems that sequester even more carbon than forests. Soil-based carbon sequestration is a negative emissions process because it removes carbon dioxide from the air and stores it. Soil is another major natural carbon sequestration element. Soil accounts for the sequestration of over 1 billion additional tons of carbon each year. Mass timber panels and cross-laminated timber is another carbon storage technology found in the use of engineered wood products, including these two things. They have been proven to be stronger than steel and more resistant to fire than any other building material. CLT construction includes technology that can resist collapse in an earthquake. This technology has been employed in many countries, Western Europe, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the US states of Oregon and Washington. This technology can utilize beetle-killed pine and other damaged wood to make timber panels. So you can manage the forest by using the wood. Cross-laminated timber panels can also be manufactured using trees that are thinned out of the forest as part of fire prevention strategy. Protecting and restoring rivers and river fauna and flora, including fish, can be accomplished by paying farmers, ranchers, and other landowners to plant trees along their banks to cool down the rivers and clean the water. Cities, towns, and states, along with federal land, must also be mandated to employ this technology. There are many ways to restore a river. One is removing dams, especially those dams whose infrastructure is antiquated and deteriorating. Two, halting the dumping of pollutants, garbage, sewage, and other harmful elements into the rivers and streams. Three, restoring floodplains and meadows, which are among the most biodiverse and productive lands on the planet, which will enhance a region's ability to raise the quantity and quality of its water. Preservation of floodplains can reduce downstream, filter excessive nutrients, and replenish groundwater. Protecting and promoting nature's engineers. Beavers that build complexes in rivers and streams that are 3 times more resistant to wildfires. In keeping the water on the landscape, beavers reduce the risk of fire, recharge groundwater, and mitigate drought. Their ponds help migrating salmon and other fish survive at a time when a number of salmon species are considered endangered. Regenerative agriculture or sustainable pest management, and with sustainable pest management, water reduction, preservation of land and forests, and natural cultivation of healthy soil and encouragement of biodiversity and climate resilience are all answers we need. Farmers can cultivate quality soil by creating environments for beneficial insects. You'll see in our Neja bulletin, we had to have an article in there by a, local, national, and internationally renowned sustainable pest manager who just describes a working group he was part of in California that developed a plan for transference to sustainable pest management here in California. He and his wife run a company, an insectary like Rincon Vitova. They come up with the natural enemies of pests, or also known as microbiome and invertebrate biological control agents, or BCAs. There are thousands of such insects which can act as non-toxic pesticides. For example, there are black ladybugs that feed on insects infesting oranges, exotic plants, and Christmas trees. There are tiny wasps that lay eggs in housefly pupae to prevent an infestation of houseflies. When used in conjunction with traps and fungal spray, these wasps are useful in reducing housefly populations. The biological control products industry is forecast to grow 14% in the coming 6 years, with more products along with our good bugs that help bridge the gap when nature's food web isn't keeping up. Desalination plants can convert salt water to drinking water. Solar desalination points to an answer. More than 120 countries in the world, including Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Spain, Cyprus, Malta, Gibraltar, Cape Verde, Portugal, Greece, Italy, India, China, Japan, Australia, and the US. The largest desalination plant is in San Diego, but I know that's gone back and forth. One of the problems with current desalination technology is that it takes an enormous amount of energy and is expensive to do the conversion. There are, however, advances in testing solar-powered desalination technologies. Researchers at MIT and in China have developed a passive solar-powered desalination system that can provide more than 1.5 gallons of fresh drinking water per hour per every square meter of solar connecting area. These systems have the potential to serve rural coastal areas, providing an efficient, low-cost water source. Another Water reclamation method is rain harvesting. You've probably heard of it, which has been used for centuries throughout the world. Rain harvesting is an ancient technology used by many cultures to capture rainfall and the use of water for irrigation and drinking. Can be used by farms, ranches, residences, and even cities to offset the use of groundwater. There is also a technique being used in coastal areas known as fog catchers. Have you heard of those? These are huge nets, like those that have been used in the Andes for decades, that can provide water to dry, arid areas with minimal rainfall. Seems perfect for here, right? According to Columbia University, their fog collection projects have used from 2 to 100 fog collectors, depending on the location, and each panel can produce 150 to 750 liters of fresh water a day during the foggy season. This water meets the WHO standard for safe drinking water. It is also possible to engineer rain through an ionization technology and a network of towers located around one central 100-foot tower. The promoters of this technology claim they can induce rain within a 15-mile radius that boosts precipitation levels from 50 to 400%. Residents, businesses, and municipalities are and can plant drought-resistant gardens and drip irrigation systems. Solar power and wind power, I'm sure you're familiar with, are well-known sources of renewable energy, and every year are becoming cheaper to produce and install. Some people say they're not perfect, though, and they're not perfect. But they're better than fossil fuels, heavy metals, tar sands, oil and gas. The U.S. solar industry alone currently employs nearly 250,000 workers. These need to be living wage jobs to be sustainable. According to a 2021 article in the Daily Energy Insider, a new report released by the American Clean Power Association says 500,000 to 600,000 new jobs could be created through the solar, wind, and battery storage industries as the country moves towards clean energy to reduce carbon emissions. Hydropower is another energy source that has grown out of favor because the hydroelectric dams on U.S. rivers have created more problems than solutions as their aging infrastructure has become too expensive to replace and unpopular because of their impact on migrating salmon, which are now endangered. Hydropower is still a clean technology, and dams can now be replaced with what's called pumped storage hydropower. Pumped storage hydropower is a way to store energy. It consists of two water reservoirs at different elevations that can generate power as gravity moves water through turbines that create electricity. The water in the lower reservoir is pumped back up to the upper reservoir, either by hydropower or wind power. When pumped storage hydropower is built together with wind turbines, it can provide a constant and consistent source of renewable energy. Small turbines within city water pipes can be used by municipalities to generate electricity as the water passes through them. Geothermal energy is a very reliable source of power. One of the biggest advantages of geothermal energy is that it is a very predictable and reliable source of energy. Almost anywhere in the world, geothermal heat can be accessed and used immediately as a source of heat. This heat energy is called low-temperature geothermal energy. It can be obtained from pockets of heat about 150 degrees Celsius or 302 degrees Fahrenheit. Most pockets of low-temperature geothermal energy are found just a few meters below ground. This energy can be used for heating greenhouses, homes, fisheries, and industrial processes. It is most efficient when used for heating. although it can generate electricity. Transition to a plant-based diet is an option. I don't know how many of you have done that. Yes, it is. We were doing an interview and says a woman named Lisa Wade, who's down in Los Gatos, told us about an Oxford University study released in 2018 by Joseph Poore, P-O-O-R-E, stated that, quote, without meat and dairy consumption, global farm use, land use could be reduced by more than 75%, an area equivalent to US, China, and the European Union and Australia combined, and still feed the world, which I thought was a very remarkable statement. I don't know if you've heard about No Mo May. Have you heard of that, or Bee Cities? It's really great. No Mo May is a nationwide initiative to inspire cities and towns to encourage residents to not mow their lawns in the month of May, thus No Mo May, obviously, to save the local bee populations. Bees are an important pollinator, as we know, for most food sources, yet are an endangered species. Cities which adopted No Mo May have 5 times the numbers of bees and 3 times the number of bee species than other cities. Plant-eating mushrooms and oil-eating worms. Scientists at Utrecht University in the Netherlands have discovered 50 species of plastic-eating, I think I said plant-eating, it's plastic-eating mushrooms, to deal with the millions of tons of plastic waste in our oceans and landfills. I mean, clearly we need to reduce the use of plastic, but the notion that we can actually clean some of it up is fantastic. Scientists at the university say that the biggest obstacle to implementing this is on a mass scale is funding. Environmental businesses and organizations such as Rincon Vitova are coming up with oil-eating worms, roundworms, to address and eat oil. We also just heard, just in regard to radioactivity, that in Chernobyl, I'm digressing for a second. We just found this out about a month ago. In Chernobyl, after the nuclear disaster there are radioactive, I said that wrong, fungi that are able to eat radioactive waste and process it so that it comes out not harmful to animals and the environment. And that, we need to put it in the Bayview, you know what I mean? So another amazing solution. Scientists have tried for years. I don't know if you're familiar with PFAS. It's in over 99% of humans and animals, I'm sure. Scientists have tried for years to find ways to break it down. Recently, researchers at Northwestern University published a study showing that PFAS can be destroyed using 2 relatively harmless chemicals: sodium hydroxide, or lye, you've heard of that, a chemical used to make soap, and dimethyl sulfoxide, a chemical approved as a medication for bladder pain syndrome. They still have to figure out industrial uses, but the fact that it can be broken up is a breakthrough.
So Neja needs full and part-time volunteer organizers to build a larger movement for sustainable recovery and development. Volunteers learn on a job arm's length community organizing. If you have time off from work, school, or you're a representative of an organization fighting for equal or sustainable recovery, consider taking a weekend, a week, a month, or a year to get more organizer training. We also need part-time volunteers for public speaking, telephone outreach, information tables, poster canvassing, as well as writing, research, illustration, and production of our quarterly newsletter, the Neja Bulletin. Individuals can put up 5 posters invite people to our next climate change presentation, host an event or a climate change presentation and invite their friends, family, colleagues, or subscribe or sponsor the Neja Bulletin. You can also join us on a site visit and spend a day volunteering with an organization we support. Businesses can support the Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs by putting the SDGs on promotional materials. Request SDG posters to be put up in their community or events. Invite us to events or host an event for the SDGs. Do a film showing. Include the SDGs in their strategic plan. Introduce us and have us speak at your merchants or neighborhood association. Refer us to organizations that need our assistance, or sponsor the Neja Bulletin. Religious groups and organizations can endorse the SDGs by putting up posters, have us do a presentation or film showing regarding the SDGs, invite us to do a table at their next event or convention, sponsor the Neja Bulletin, highlight an SDG every month and do an event regarding those SDGs. You can also introduce Neja to other organizations. So join our campaign today. Gail is passing around a clipboard, and if you're interested, you can sign up today. Thank you. Any questions?
The first question is, why is there a media blackout on the 17 Sustainable Developmental Goals?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it goes back to, thank you for the questions. Questions are always really good. One of the things that we've noticed is that although the United States as a government signed the SDGs, we haven't put in a federal plan. It's not that the government hasn't done anything. We have passed several laws, but there's no integrated plan to transition fully to renewable energy consistent with the SDGs. And therefore, there's also been no media campaign through the major media sources, if you see what I'm saying. The New York Times, the Washington Post out here, the San Francisco Chronicle, have rarely, if ever, mentioned them. And so I think the two are connected in relation to what the media does and doesn't talk about. And the federal government controls some of that. And there's a lot more to say about our media, but that's what I'd say. Most of the media relies not on their circulation these days, but on their sponsors. And if you look at who is sponsoring the New York Times, they're big businesses. And who are they writing for? Some of those wealthy interests that are supporting the fossil fuel companies or, petrochemicals and other groupings like that. That's a short answer. Thank you.
Are the Friends of the Urban Forest still active in San Francisco? And are the number of trees going up in the San Francisco area? What's being done to expand the number of trees in the Bay Area?
Well, I'm not part of the Friends of Urban Forest, but I know that the Friends of Urban Forest went through sort of during COVID, they weren't nearly as active for obvious reasons. And then in about the midway through the pandemic, we began to see more Friends of the Urban Forest activities, and they are definitely active. In some ways, they were helping, as far as I know, also maintain the trees because, and more recently, a lot of the trees have been knocked down. So some of the big storms, we had that one, I remember watching a tree, go literally, it turned into an L right in front of our house. I was like, wow, that's amazing. when we had the 80-mile-per-hour winds. So, but they are still very active, and I know they're growing, and they're focusing on planting trees in what are more deserty areas in the Bayview and Visitation Valley that don't, literally the canopy is way less, and therefore it's much hotter, 20% hotter in those areas.
Let's see. Does the NEJA see Clear Power San Francisco as a good program and something to organize around? Clean power. Sorry,
Yeah,
clean power. Clean power.
San Francisco Clean Power. We put solar. We work out of a Victorian house on Webster Street, and we decided, well, we put solar on our property. Put our money where our mouth is. And we got a rebate from the San Francisco Clean Power incentive program. It took a little while, but I think that government incentives for solar and the fact that that has been rolled back over the past year in the net metering 3, I think round 3, whatever they call it, is a regressive move and doesn't support homeowners or nonprofits and other businesses in putting solar power. So yeah, I think Clean Power is basically a good program. Maybe some of the details, but yeah.
What percentage of methane emissions come from animals raised for meat or dairy? And then water, 55% of Colorado River water used to raise feed for these animals. Can we do something about that?
It's interesting. Thank you for that question. I don't know I can't answer how much methane it comes from animals. I don't remember that figure, so I'll have to find out. What I will say is we've started to research the Colorado River situation, and we decided we'd write an editorial about it because give the example of California. We had a drought in 2015, right? We were told, all us homeowners, residents were told to ration. There were several rounds of that. And we've been told that repeatedly. However, if you look at it, there are still massive amounts of water that are being, like in Southern California up to really San Francisco, that is still being fracked, I call it, but destroyed water that produced water is being integrated in the Kern County, for example, water system to use for agriculture. So we're still destroying water, and those oil and gas companies are allowed to poison that water. And companies like Nestle has been paying very little for using, last I heard, I think it was 80,000 gallons of water a day to bottle water. Now, what's wrong with that picture? Last year, the farmers it's a huge picture. The farmers were divided into 2 groups or maybe even 3 groups. Our water rights are different here in the West than it is in the East. But some farmers were said, you can get the water you usually have or have to ration more. But many of that second level farmers were not able to farm. So you have thousands of farmers, fallowing their fields or destroying or selling. And yet we're still being told we need to cut back. Now, I know there's a governmental plan because in the Colorado River that's been getting lower and lower, and the Aglala Aquifer is also in big trouble because of water use. But if you look at positive programs, I realize right now they have to ration because otherwise there'll be like no water. But it's a reaction. And our point here with pointing to solutions, the planting of trees and restoring of wetlands, I'll refer you to, I don't have the link, but it's a group called Eco Restoration Alliance. And they say that carbon capture is not completely misfocused. We obviously need all of it. But they say that eco-restoration, planting of trees that creates clean water and produces more water and captures carbon at the same time, and restoring wetlands would actually cool the atmosphere a lot faster than carbon capture. In other words, the short story is there are more solutions that are progressive that can restore our land, restore our water, restore our air, and we're not putting them in, which is why we think we need to demand not only locally, but regionally and nationally, because some of that money is going to have to come from the federal government to restore. So we can't just ration. It's a short-term strategy. We need to put in the strategies towards solutions. So that's a short answer of that.
Okay, we have two more questions here. If anybody else has, do you have a question? Would you like to come up and ask it right now?
I appreciated that you mentioned the desalinization.
You got to talk right up.
I appreciate that you mentioned desalinization as a solution for drinking water, but also I've been reading a lot about the use of tides to create energy.
Yes.
And I haven't heard much happening about that. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, we actually did an article a few years ago about oceans and tidal power, and we didn't mention it here today. I know that on our coastlines, we are using more and more tidal power, which creates energy. I can't tell you many more details about it because we haven't looked recently, but it was definitely a progressive movement to be able to use that. Yeah.
Here's another heartfelt question. Thank you, but what can people do about eating meat? The production of meat by factory farms, which puts 2 tons of methane into the air, destroys forests like in the Amazon. So if people stop demanding meat, that would be the simple thing anyone could do to stop heating the world.
Well, clearly, not everybody is going to stop eating meat. There are many cultures that are dependent on that, or it would take some work to transition. However, the factory farms are bad for the environment, as whoever asked the question. They're bad for the workers that work there. And the entire agricultural system is destroying our water, air, and land. That's fundamentally true. The fertilizers and pesticides, the GMO products that are being promoted by what is now Bayer, but was Monsanto, are bad for all human beings. It can be reversed. The effects of genetically modified products on human beings can be reversed by going to an organic, mostly plant-based diet. It doesn't, for some, it can happen within 4 weeks. We had a pediatrician write an article for us about that, working with children that has and reversed a cancer that one of the children's parents had. So it points to the need that it is a national question, although it's also an international question. If you started with at least organic raising of cattle and sheep and hogs versus the factory farm and chickens, obviously, as a start to transition that massive food production system, but it would obviously need a plan. We don't necessarily have a food production problem. You know, we have a food distribution system. You know, the distribution of our food system is unequal. And I think planning towards that so there's not more starvation, et cetera, is definitely possible.
Dolores, would you like to speak? Well, yeah, you look a little bit like you'd like to.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much. But I think we do have a problem, and people don't have to have meat. Even if people would cut back on their meat, that would help a lot. If they eat meat 5 times a week, if they cut back and maybe only eat it twice a week, first of all, they'd feel better, I'm sure. But second of all, it would stop a lot of horrible killing of all these animals, and we could start to do something by thinking about the other animals that are sentient beings on this earth, and also make them healthier. And for example, we wouldn't have had to cut down the Amazon forest, which are the lungs of this earth, just for the production of beef. That's what they're doing. So I just I'm really interested in people cutting back on eating meat. So thank you so much. You're doing a beautiful job. I'm sorry. Let me just say one thing. If I said that we don't have a problem with meat production, I didn't mean to say that. I am a vegan myself. We are promoting veganism. What I was trying to say is not everybody's going to move to that immediately. And so that, yeah, we should go in that direction. Thank you.
There are just 2 more questions that have come from our audience, and then we have to wrap up at 1:15. So it's about 18 of right now. Is your organization supportive of the Green New Deal?
Yeah, in the sense that it's a positive. It's a motion that's in the positive towards a transition to renewable energy. Living wage jobs needs to be tied with that in the sense of ending poverty and hunger to solve and leave nobody behind. Neja is not a nonprofit that can support or negate any particular piece of legislation. We're definitely not that kind of nonprofit, but we educate about the positives and negatives of laws and things like that. So of course it's motion forward.
And then there's a question which I just recently read about, so I'm kind of interested in your answer too. Do you have a position on nuclear power plants? Yes.
For nuclear power, one of the major dangers of nuclear power is that it's very dangerous, as we saw with Fukushima. I realize there are definitely environmentalists that think that nuclear power is part of the answer, and we don't have a position on that right now. I think we'd have to study it. What I do know, and we haven't, is that many of the breakdowns of the nuclear plants, whether it be from 3 Mile Island, which was from a mechanical error, are human-related lack of maintenance problems. So again, I don't know that they are the answer because of the dangers and the contamination, as we've seen when nuclear plants fail, overrides anything else.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Gail and Ailin. This was a very, very informative presentation. I'm 150% aligned with all of your ideas here. I really liked one of the things that you said, Ailin, which is a suggestion for religious groups that could promote the SDGs. And it's giving me an idea for maybe how we could think about theming the forum topics going forward. So thank you for that. A few of you weren't here at the beginning, so I'm just going to repeat 1 or 2 of the housekeeping announcements. This is the last forum for the summer. We're taking a little hiatus until September, so please be back in September for more interesting and informative programming. I want to mention that this Wednesday, we are having a meeting of UUJME. That's the subcommittee of the Human Rights Working Group that's working on raising awareness about human rights in Israel, Palestine. So if that is a topic of interest to you, please attend our meeting or just, contact me and we'll keep you informed in case you can't attend the meetings. Lastly, I'd like to really once again recognize and applaud really Bruce for his many years of work on the, just a moment, please.
Present for Bruce right here.
Thank you. We have a present for Bruce, who's done 7 years, I believe, of organizing around the forum. Think of all the presentations that were really Bruce's idea, and he brought the people here. So I find him really an inspiring activist, and I hope to achieve something like what you've done over the years, Bruce.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all the people that have attended over the years, these forums. I hope that we can continue, the forum will continue and expand. And I call on all of you who are part of the audience, whether you're online or here, to come forward with your ideas. If you don't want to necessarily be part of the organizing, you could be part of that, I believe. But if you have ideas about forum and things that need to be spoken to, and like we heard this morning, feel this is part of, this is part of your responsibility, whatever, your freedom to be vocal about what's going on in the world. We need more outcry and more activism and more people speaking about these issues, because we all know that our situation as a species and many other species is highly in danger, and we have a dire need to do something about it. So anyway, this is one small way that we can address the issues and maybe get other people involved and get more people active and so on. And I don't know what's in here. It's very heavy. It's probably just gold pieces or something like that. But anyway, I appreciate it. I appreciate the folks that I work with, the committee, the Human Rights Working Group, other people who've worked on forum, Melvin, who supplied tirelessly, not only just the breakfast, because he gets kiddo, whatever they call it, for the breakfast and stuff. But Melvin behind the scenes has brought forward so many people and come forward with so many different ideas about forum, and he does it without being in the spotlight. And he deserves a great deal of Dolores and Jeff and Robin and David and all the other folks that have worked on this also deserve, to be recognized. So anyway, that's it. Thanks. Have a good afternoon.